Hey y'all, welcome back. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bonnethead and I do horror analysis on the internet. Today's video we're going to start with a little bit of a game. How do you feel about that? Hopefully you feel okay about that because we're starting. All good? Okay, great. We're going to start with a couple of questions. Have you seen this woman before? What about this guy? Or this one? How about this woman? Now, the likelihood that you have seen each and every one of the archetypes that I have just showed you, either in person or online, is fairly high. And honestly, you may not be able to tell one person who fits this archetype from the next. Seriously, walk into any Starbucks and I promise you, you will understand what I'm talking about. A lot of the people who fit under these certain archetypes that I just showed you feel very similar and they look very similar. Now I'm going to ask you some more in-depth questions about these archetypes. Okay, so which one of these archetypes do you think is most likely to have bought either a Stanley Cup or maybe some AirPod Maxes or both in many cases? If you chose this one, then I would agree with you. Now, which one of these archetypes is most likely to own a pair of Oakleys? If you chose this one, then I also agree with you. Which one probably listens to Claro and thrifts most of their clothes? If you chose this guy over here, congratulations, we're on the same page. Now for a really specific one. Which one of these archetypes do you think chews their gum really loud? If you chose Miss Cookie Monster Pajama Pants over here, I absolutely agree. Now, what's so interesting about what you just did, and what I really want you to notice from playing this game, do you see how you were able to match consumer habits, how you were able to match businesses frequented, how you were even able to match personal habits to each and every one of these arbitrary collections of items? I'm fairly certain that we were on the same page for pretty much all of these answers. But I have one more question that I want you to answer. Take a look at these two images. I want you to tell me who you think each of these people voted for. You see how easy that was? Do you see how predictable we are? Now, this may feel pretty random and kind of out there. You might be wondering why I'm even starting the video like this. But my point in bringing this up to you is to set the stage for what we will be investigating in today's video. What we will be investigating through the 2023 Netflix original, They Cloned Tyrone, which was directed by Juel Taylor. Now, I've seen this movie about 4 times at this point, but between the Epstein files, the forceful shoving of AI down our throats, and the information that we've slowly but surely been able to gather about social media algorithms and how they're used to control and predict us, my interpretation of this film has grown a new level of understanding that I think is worth sharing, mostly because I think it is particularly relevant in today's day and age. This is also because I truly believe that this film reaches far beyond the still very important race commentary that it's making, but I also believe that it exposes an extremely effective tactic of government control over the public, and I think that more of us need to be aware of it, because the more we understand this tactic, the less easily controllable we are. So with all of that being said, today, we are going to be doing a deep dive into the manufactured predictability of our population and why that predictability is so important to our government. So that's a lot of words. You might not understand them all. You might not understand why this connects to the movie, so let's get into it. For those of you who haven't seen the movie or maybe need a quick refresher, They Cloned Tyrone takes place in a low-income neighborhood called Glen. We follow our main character, a drug dealer named Fontaine, who is shot and killed very early on in the film by his op during a routine money collection from a local pimp named Slick Charles. But when Fontaine wakes up the next morning completely unharmed, he, Slick Charles, and witness and prostitute Yo-Yo begin to unravel a government conspiracy that they never thought was possible. Now, y'all might already know this, but I absolutely love a good government conspiracy cover-up movie, so let's get into it. Now, very much like all of the archetypes that we were discussing in the game that we played just now, our main character, Fontaine, is very predictable. Every morning, he goes to the same corner store called Got Drank, where he buys a scratch-off, a 40-ounce, and a pack of Rio's cigars. He plays his scratch off, he loses, he shares some of his drink with a local homeless man that sits outside of the store. His name is Frog. He then goes and pumps some iron with his boys, and then goes about monitoring his business selling drugs. It's the same deal in the same order every single day. He does all of this, by the way, in an extremely sick and extremely clean 1976 Pontiac Grand Prix. It is gorgeous, but that's besides the point. Not only is he super predictable, but you also might have noticed that we are already seeing some very stereotypical characters that pop up in ghettos in real life. All across the nation, every ghetto has them. Drug dealers, pimps, prostitutes, homeless men, etc., etc., etc. Like I said, Every ghetto has them. You also may have noticed that none of these characters are really unique in the grand scheme of things. Sure, they all have their own personalities, but their jobs, their being is not necessarily a unique one. And neither is the town of Glen. It's a ghetto filled with impoverished people who are just struggling to try to live, assumingly in the inner city. Meaning that our entire setting is one big statistic, really, that is marked by all of the signifiers of a neglected people. Meaning that the setting is extremely familiar to us. And like I said, not unique. Our setting is repeatable and it is predictable. Now, I understand it may sound like I'm just saying the same thing in different phrasing, but I really want to hammer this point home. And you'll see why in a little bit. Now, like I said, Fontaine is very early on shot and killed by a rival drug dealer after collecting the money that he is owed by Slick Charles, the local pimp. Now, mind you, this guy took like 6 shots to the chest, I think. So he's definitely dead. No chance that this guy survived. By the time it's all over with, his body looks like Swiss cheese. But somehow he manages to wake up the next day completely unharmed, no bullet wounds, no nothing. He's ready to take on this next day the same way he did the last. He goes to the corner store, he buys his lottery ticket, he buys his 40 ounce, he buys his pack of Rio cigars, he shares some of his drink with Frog, who tells him he has this new car smell. Okay. Clearly Frog knows something that we don't, but he's a crazy homeless man, right? Don't listen to him. He goes to pump iron with his boys, and then he goes on about his business. So not recalling his death, he goes to collect money from Slick Charles again, who very frantically informs Fontaine that he had been shot and killed the night previously. He witnessed it. He saw it. He saw him die in the parking lot of that motel. And he's freaking out. He's thinking he's seen a ghost, all of this kind of stuff. Now, obviously, Fontaine doesn't believe this. He doesn't remember any of this happening. He feels fine. He looks fine. So, Slick Charles looks to Yo-Yo, his prostitute, to corroborate his claim, which she does because she was there. She heard the whole thing go down. So, rightfully confused by his own apparent death and resurrection, Fontaine drags Yo-Yo and Slick Charles to get to the bottom of what happened the previous night. Now, throughout this investigation, the trio finds through an underground laboratory that's hidden beneath a trap house that the government is actually conducting an entire experiment on the town of Glen, where the ultimate goal is to create a completely controllable and completely predictable environment. In this lab, Fontaine finds the clone of himself that had been shot and killed the night before. He finds the body that looks exactly like him, but it has a bunch of bullet wounds, while Yo-Yo and Slick Charles find a bunch of unexplained drugs, which they later find out that these drugs are being put into all kinds of products that are sold specifically in Glen in order to elicit certain controllable reactions through these products. The fried chicken sold in their local restaurant makes people feel joyous and makes people want to laugh. The hair relaxer at their local salon acts as an actual relaxer. The grape juice served at their local church makes people feel faithful and want to praise. Various songs played on their local radio stations and in their local clubs elicit different moods. This is all through some form of hypnotism. There's not actual drugs being put in the music. Soul songs seem to elicit some form of tiredness. Hip-hop music makes people feel violent. R&B music makes people feel extremely emotional and very affectionate, etc. Now, in our own world, we definitely have seen how clever marketing and manufactured environments can definitely elicit and reap the same reactions across a large majority of people. This is obviously an extremely intentional outcome, and it's known as social engineering. Now, some of you may know this, but the Stanley Cup craze originated with a video that was posted online of a Stanley Cup supposedly surviving a car fire. This video was later proven fake, but by that point it was already too late. People went crazy for these cups because of this video. This cup was also seen in the hands of some of your favorite influencers. It was cool, it was girly, it was no longer this workman's cup. It's the trendy new teen girl thing. The Stanley Cup is now ridiculously successful because of the very clever marketing done by one guy. His name is Terrence Riley, and he is the very same guy who has done marketing for Crocs and Hey Dudes. All 3 of the brands that he has done marketing for have blown up amongst the younger crowd because of the way he is able to elicit the same reactions to these products from the masses. Hey, editing me here again. Everyone say hi to Milkshake. She's my little assistant. But I wanted to pop in because I made a mistake here in saying that he elicits the same reaction from the masses, because he doesn't. This guy has managed to elicit the same reaction from a specific subsection of people that has been created as a result of algorithms on social media. Algorithms push us into different segments and tell us what we do and don't like. He has played a very large role in that and has used it to his advantage to market the different products that he's put in charge of. Anyways, yeah, back to the video. Now, I mentioned before how in the film the government uses music to control people's moods. The rapper Ice Cube has actually talked about this very same phenomenon phenomena. He's talked about how very popular record labels will use rap or will create rap songs with the intention of promoting violence amongst the Black community. This violence keeps the Black community oppressed and controllable. And not only controllable, but predictable. There comes that word again. We also see the usage of manipulation and controlled reactions in our politics. A large reason that Trump was able to win in 2024 was his ability to pull over the young male demographic. He won over the manosphere by going on various different manosphere podcasts. And by going on these popular podcasts, he was able to sort of reach out to their audiences and get them to vote for him. He tapped into that relatability factor with them. He was tapping into audiences that may not have been super into politics at first, but definitely still had conservative leaning ideas, specifically ideas about women. So it's very possible that all this audience needed was a little extra nudge in the right direction. Keyword being right. A different kind of political social engineering came in 2016. I don't know how many of you have watched the Netflix documentary called The Hack, but if you haven't, I highly recommend that you do. Throughout the lead up to the 2016 election, Trump got a lot of help from a company called Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica had a very powerful data tracking software that knew how to find and influence voters who were on the fence. They would influence these on the fence voters by feeding them content that would push them more in the direction of Trump. Why this wasn't considered election interference, I have zero clue. And I know that sounds conspiratorial, but it's literally free information. You can look it up. But yes, all of that to say that the government and companies put a lot of stock into making sure that we are predictable and that we are controllable via things like social engineering. So the government in They Cloned Tyrone actually mimics this concept in a much more palatable and easier to understand way. That being drugging all of the products and creating hypnotic music. Again, a form of social engineering that keeps the public controllable and predictable. Now continuing on, while Fontaine, Slick Charles, and Yo-Yo are amongst their investigation, they find that the entire town is being monitored under a really heavy mass surveillance system. There are surveillance cameras and bug devices literally everywhere that all report back to the same place and allow the government to observe the town folks' behavior. This is how the government manages to so quickly find out when one of the citizens dies, at which point they very quickly collect the body and shove it into a blacked out SUV and send out the new clone of that person the very next day. This, of course, is what happened to Fontaine. Now, I don't think I need to tell you that we have seen a very similar pattern of mass surveillance emerging in our world, specifically with modern data surveillance companies such as Palantir, who seek to create completely predictable profiles of people based on buying history and consumer habits, based on algorithmic likes and dislikes, based on the media that you create and consume, even down to what images that you pause to look at in your feed. As you're scrolling and you pause, they're tracking exactly how long you pause for before you move on to the next thing, even if you don't engage with that post at all. It's terrifying and it's extremely accurate. It's a large reason why you may be talking about something and then whatever, you get an ad for that very same thing a couple minutes later. Yes, part of it could be that your phone is listening to you. I'm not ruling that option out, but it is also because they have built such a strong profile of who you are and what your habits are that they can predict exactly what and when you need it and why. That is how exact these things are. I don't think people realize that. They build a profile on you so they can predict your behavior, so they know how to market to you, so they know what they can put in your feed. This is why data is so valuable. This is why and how Palantir has managed to get a seat at the table at the government. Our government is working so closely with Palantir now, weirdly closely, under the priority of citizen surveillance and predictable profiles. Profiles on the public, profiles on you and me, because predictable people can more effectively be marketed to and controlled, whether it's for products to purchase or politicians to vote for. We talked about Cambridge Analytica earlier, so back to the movie. After this trio breaks into this underground laboratory again, they find out that in order to figure out what drugs and hypnotics work and don't work, these government-hired researchers and scientists experiment on Black people. I'm not going to re-explain how possible that is. We talked about government experimentation on Black people and other civilians in our last video, but if you don't want to watch that whole video, but I highly recommend you do, it's very interesting. The government has zero problem experimenting on its own citizens, especially if they're Black. Now I would like to talk about what I believe believe is the most important quote in the entire film that was delivered to us by a government supervisor threatening our little trio so that they stop their whole investigation. And I'm going to read it word for word here. America was an experiment, a half-baked experiment cooked up by aristocratic ideologues living in mansions built by slaves. And when they checked out, they left us with the bill. A country constantly at war with itself. No common ground, no dialogue, no peace. If we're all on the same page, we're not ripping each other's heads off, and all of this has a chance to work. Now that's a bit of a long quote, so I'm going to break it up into two parts. This first part. America was an experiment, a half-baked experiment cooked up by aristocratic ideologues living in mansions built by slaves, and when they checked out, they left us with the bill. Now, you may have heard this idea of America being an experiment one or two times, and when people say that, generally they're referring to this idea of whether or not a truly democratic system can create a functioning and successful society, i.e., are people smart enough to vote in their best interest or intelligently? It's an interesting question, and many have not necessarily found the answer to it. But many have also concluded that the answer is no, largely because nobody can seem to agree on anything, and a lot of us are very poorly educated on our political system and just politics in general. Now, in the second part, a country constantly at war with itself, no common ground, no dialogue, no peace. If we're all on the same page, we're not ripping each other's heads off, and all of this has a chance to work. Now, this indicates that this experiment that is being done in a very controlled setting like Glen, and later we find out other ghettos across the nation, has the goal of controlling the public so effectively to the point of getting everybody to agree or play their roles so that not only can they be completely at peace with one another, but will also be completely predictable by the government. Why? So that the government and so that powerful people can get what they want. If we're predictable, that means we're controllable. If we're controllable, that means we can just be influenced and tricked into voting for anything. It means that we can be tricked into voting against our own interest. Now, the supervisor also admits something very interesting to us. He says that in order for this government experiment to work, they need criminals like Fontaine and Slick Charles to keep the crime rate high enough that it is considered extremely undesirable to those who may come in and gentrify the town. And if the town gets gentrified, then it becomes something of value to society. But as of right now, Glen is a very forgettable trap, one of many that are sprinkled throughout the US. It is a trap that none of its citizens are able to escape, and it's completely designed that way. We've seen that very same concept happen with our own world, particularly in our ghettos, with the staggering drop of economic and social mobility, largely due to systemic racism and the systemic oppression of Black people that keeps them from moving up the social ladder. We saw it with the crack epidemic in the 80s that was brought on by Reagan, our own government. The crack epidemic was meant to keep the Black community poor and crime-ridden and all of the things that the government benefits from in order to point to and have an enemy and to have the have-nots. Similar to how in the They Cloned Tyrone universe, the ghetto is the first to be experimented on because it is a community of people that the government views as less valuable and most easily forgotten, that being poor and Black people. So later in a turn of events, Chester, or the original Fontaine, reveals that he is actually partnered with the government on this experiment. He is the originator of this whole idea because he believes that if we are predictable, or if Black people assimilate into white culture, that the world will ultimately be safer and people won't die like his younger brother tragically did to a police officer. Now, it definitely seems like he's wanting to turn Black people white, and that does not seem to be the same motivations that the government has, specifically because they're not trying to get the people of Glen to act white. They're actually doing the complete opposite. They're wanting them to fall into stereotypes. So it very much seems like he's kind of being a little bit naive in this whole thing, even if his original intentions are still evil and very much internally racist. But the idea is, like I was talking about earlier in this quote, that says if we are on the same page, we're not ripping each other's heads off, and all of this has the chance to work. Chester believes that a world in which everybody is controlled and everybody assimilates into the same culture is a world that is safer, is a world that is peaceful, is a world that is predictable. Okay, hey, Milkshake and I are back again. I really wanted to take a second to acknowledge the racial commentary that's happening in this film because it really is so prominent and it is very smart on its own. I know ultimately my goal with this video is to provide a different perspective to the movie, but I do want to acknowledge that really smart and very prominent commentary that is being made about Black people and about the Black community. We're obviously seeing a lot about how the government greatly benefits from the existence of ghettos, from the existence of Black poverty. And like I said, this is due to a couple of different factors, a large one being the prison industrial complex, and how that provides slave labor. But like I'll mention here in a little bit, this idea of people being forced to play their roles being the have-beens and the have-nots, scares the have-beens into behaving in the way that the government intends. So having the bad guys, having the criminals, having this, that, and the other provides a narrative for those in power to campaign on and continue with this exact same power structure, where we're all focused on fighting amongst ourselves via racism and all that kind of crap, rather than looking upwards at the real problem. So yes, a big thing being that the government creates ghettos and makes sure that the people within them cannot escape them to their own benefit. Now, I do still believe that this has a lot to do with this theme of predictability that I'm talking about, largely because the government's goal is to create a predictable environment within the ghetto or within poor Black communities where Black men are much more likely to go to prison, for example. But like I talk about a little bit, Chester's internalized racism and his misunderstanding of the entire situation causes him to believe that if Black people were to act white or were to assimilate into white culture, that they would be better off because they would no longer have these sorts of violent run-ins with the police. This is also why he is mistaken about the government's true intentions and their desire to more closely and more accurately control these populations on a smaller scale. Controlling ghettos, controlling suburbs, controlling rural areas. Also, the government can predict the behavior of everybody and not just the ghettos. So my point in saying this is that this all expands far beyond race, but it is important to acknowledge that although this extends far beyond race, Black people get the short end of the stick every single time. Anyways, yeah, this is the last you'll see of me. Now, after the group is very effectively threatened by this government supervisor, Fontaine falls into a sense of apathy and complicity. He feels that he was created to be a drug dealer, so he's just gonna be a drug dealer. He also feels that he holds zero power against the government. He's just one guy, and the government has access to basically unlimited resources, but his apathy and his complicity are very much evidenced by his you lose lottery ticket. He is only ever questioned now, where he goes to scratch off every single one of the little bubbles and all 4 of them say you lose, meaning that he never actually has a shot at winning the lottery. And Frog very encouragingly says you lose always after seeing Fontaine scratch off his lottery ticket, meaning that the government never has your best interest in heart, again, especially as a Black person. But I believe what he's also saying here is that you need to win yourself. You can't rely on anybody else. You cannot rely on the government especially to have your back and to allow you to win. Now, this feeling of complicity and powerlessness is extremely common amongst the public in They Cloned Tyrone, but also in our world. We've seen with the countless scandals of the Trump administration, especially with the partial release of the Epstein files, that if the government postures and overwhelms the public enough, people will fall into complicity and feelings of powerlessness because there's so much big stuff going on all at once. How are we supposed to address all of it? And we don't even have the resources that the government has. It's a really, really difficult feeling to overcome once it's instilled into a society, and it's one that I really hope that our society can overcome with specific individuals who refuse to give up, just like Yo-Yo in They Cloned Tyrone, who is the only one who refuses to give up and the only one who refuses to stop trying to expose the government for the horrible crimes that they're committing. Here we are again with a Black woman acting as the pillar of the Black community. We see it in these commentaries time and again. But to Fontaine and Slick Charles' credit, eventually Fontaine cannot ignore what he knows any longer, especially after realizing that his mother is a mere voice recording. Nothing around him is real, everything is controlled. But more importantly, he realizes the significance and the importance of the youth in their town. He wants to create a better world for them. So once Yo-Yo is captured by the government for her attempts at justice, Fontaine and Slick Charles devise a plan. At this point, we get a super sick lowrider cavalry shot once their plan is set into motion, of course, where they realize that the people are stronger in numbers. They individually may feel powerless on their own, but once they get together and have thousands and thousands of people, if not millions if you go across the country, there is strength in numbers. So once the public wakes up and actually bands together, they figure out that they can revolt and enact real change. Now, this plan and this revolt that happens in this film is actually an example on a much smaller scale of how revolutions begin in real life. The people realize that they can enact change because they are the ones with the true power. The people will always end up winning if they are fed up enough in numbers and if they become unpredictable. Now, in this film, the people end up winning. They terrorize this underground laboratory, they release all of these clones, which makes the news and causes revolutions across the country and all of these other experimental ghettos, which means true change has been put into motion, and all of this commotion makes it back to the original clone from the title, Tyrone. Ah, my gosh, it's such a good movie. Now, after all of that final analysis, right? Overarching theme, I'm gonna say it again. They want us predictable. Now, I understand that there are many different interpretations of this film, and I'm not gonna ignore them. This film has a lot to say about the abuse of the Black community and how they are used and systematically kept oppressed for the benefit of the government and or those who are higher on the social hierarchy, meaning that there have to be have-nots in order to scare the have-beens into behaving properly, aka voting Republican out of fear of minorities and fear of being poor, because being poor is ugly. And this perspective on things is extremely smart and extremely important. Again, I'm not going to minimize it, but I also believe that this film has an extremely intelligent perspective that is equally as important on manufactured predictability, as well as the intentional segmenting of people into archetypes so the government knows exactly who to target and how. This film segments prostitutes, it segments drug dealers, kingpins, homeless men, pimps, all of these guys, all of the characters needed in a stereotypical ghetto by, like I said, putting them in segments, putting them in little clusters, creating a stereotype, creating a predictable model of a person. And we saw earlier with all of the archetypes that I showed you in our little game that we played, we saw just how easy it was to predict certain elements of their behavior, very specific elements, based on such little information. I mean, the images contained mostly clothes and some random objects. And I want you to think about how valuable that ability must be to conglomerates and to the government. And with that, is it that unbelievable to say that they would manufacture a predictable society no matter the cost? I don't think so. All I'm saying is Frog was dismissed as this crazy conspiracy theorist talking in riddles and saying all kinds of wild stuff, but he was right the entire time. So with that, that's all I have on They Cloned Tyrone. I hope y'all learned a little bit of something, or I at least got you thinking. And maybe I could have provided a different interpretation of the film. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. I'd love to know. Also, I mentioned it in my last couple of videos, but I'm going to mention it here. Make sure to go and check out the Jinx Podcast. We talk about a lot of interesting movies over there. It's a lot more relaxed. It's a lot more chill. But we delve into some pretty interesting topics. So if you like videos like this, I would definitely go and check it out. But yeah, if you like this video, then make sure you leave a like or even consider subscribing if you want to see more content like this. I hope y'all have a fantastic rest of your day. Anyways, see y'all. Bye!